Hello. In this video I'm going to show you how to improve your painting of buildings in watercolour, a very important part of a landscape. And I've brought you out to this beautiful Peak District village on a nice sunny summer morning, and I've already started doing some sketching of this little row of thatched cottages. And before I start putting any detail in, like windows and stonework, I'm just going to establish the sort of perspective. Get a few perspective lines in. Just get the basic structure right before you start on any sort of detail. The thatch on these makes them unusual because you're used to looking at angles and fairly sharp corners on buildings, but this thatch just softens it, makes it quite a bit more interesting, but a bit more of a challenge to draw. I've got to make sure I do get those right. It's getting quite near to us now, so each of these little gables are getting bigger, a bit more noticeable each time. And remember, it's not a neat edge, so we can loosen that up a bit and soften it up. Little things of interest, like where windows are sort of half open, can just add a little bit of interest, a little bit of life to the subject. And I'm going to make sure that I really sketch in with a rich dark, almost a black, for the panes of the windows. And what I do, I tend to sketch the pane in, the pane of glass, with the dark behind it. And what you're left with is a bit of white paper that represents the casement. That always looks more realistic than if you actually try drawing the frame itself. And those lines I put in at the beginning of the drawing are really helping me to maintain the correct perspective right the way through it. It's just a glimpse of a little window there, and we'll just put a couple of panes in, that's all you can see. Just indicate these plants and climbers with a few strokes of the pencil. I shall take a photograph to give me some extra information to fill this in before I leave the scene. Important as well with buildings that you observe things like the slates and tiles on roofs, but don't draw or paint every one of them, just suggest them. I'm using a good 2B pencil, which if I don't press on too much I can get a fairly thin line, but if I want to get a dark definite stroke, a real almost black, then I can do that. And you've got to remember that you start to lose some of these panes now when you get all the growth around the bottom of them. Now, one of the things that attracted me to this scene is the real dark, heavy greens of the trees at the back there. They're really sort of acting in to create a negative shape that's really throwing forward the shapes of these cottages. And I'm using a graphite stick now, an 8B graphite stick, which puts a lot of shading on quite quickly, just to get the shaping of this big tree here. There's a sort of medium tone here, so if I don't press on quite so much, for that hedgerow through there. And then all the way across this distant part, there's like a woodland that you just get a glimpse of. Don't want too much detail. Now there's just enough detail visible at this right hand side to stop your eye from wandering out of the picture. And now there's some quite darks under the eaves. Got to make the eave look like it does stick out further than the building. And it's casting quite a strong shadow under there. But really all this growth is obscuring a lot of the detail from the downstairs part of the cottage, which is part of its charm actually. Now there'll be some shadows, because of the lights coming from the right, there'll be some fairly strong shadows across the track. Let's get a strong shadow across the foreground. The beauty of the graphite stick is it really speeds up your sketching, because it's not as fine a point as an ordinary pencil. Strengthen those perspective lines. A bit more tone into the stonework here. And you can really press on towards the foreground as well. If these perspective lines coming down this track get slightly thicker and darker as they get nearer to you, then it creates that feeling of distance in the painting. And I think really that's plenty of information in that quick sketch that, coupled with a photograph, I can take back home to the studio and work up into a watercolour painting. Well, from the sketch and the photographs that we took out on location, I've now done a simplified line drawing directly onto my watercolour paper, ready to paint on top of. So I'm going to start now by mixing some colours for the sky to put some nice washes in for the background. So I'm going to start with a nice glow for the background. That's some raw sienna with a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm now going to take some cobalt blue and cobalt violet. You don't want too much cobalt violet or it'll go too purple. It just warms the cobalt blue slightly. Then I'm just going to start with the same mixture again for this third colour, and then I'm going to make that into a nice warm grey with the addition of a bit of burnt sienna. Well, that's the three colours prepared for the sky. I'm now going to take a large wash brush and put a layer of clean water right across the sky area. I'm just dropping that down to where I've put some masking fluid around the top of the building to preserve the shapes of the chimneys and the rooftops. Starting with the yellowy glow in the bottom of the sky, just lay that colour in. Using the side of the brush so I put plenty of colour down. Now the mixture of cobalt blue and cobalt violet. And then the final colour, that grey mix,